Hello. Unfortunately, an issue with our Twitch VODs caused the deletion of episode 13 before we had the opportunity to archive it. Rather than leave a gap in the story, I've put together a recap of the events of the episode, told from the perspective of Miah. Enjoy. Hearing Etrin's voice inside my head was difficult enough to deal with. When it progressed to having him visit my dreams, I truly began to worry. Now here he was, standing before us, rotted flesh and bone as clear as day. I was scared, terrified. I could feel similar emotions weaving through Kunkuval as he sat there beside me. We exchanged a brief glance, and I could see a sort of curious determination in his eyes. It was enough to encourage me to press forward. Kunkuval and I stepped down from our seat. At the same time, our companions emerged from the carriage, curious at the commotion outside. We all stood in awe before the intimidating, impressive form of Etrin. We were all probably thinking the same thing, expecting the same thing. An attack. A creature like this could wipe us all out with little effort. But he didn't. Instead, Etrin told us to turn around, to return to the caves in which we encountered the trapped creature, the creature whose voice and desires linked Etrin and I together, to free it from its crystalline cage. We of course refused such a demand. We didn't know anything about this creature or what it was capable of. How could we unleash such a thing upon Odag? But Etrin was quite insistent, and we all knew that continued refusal would likely result in a battle that we could not win. After we took a moment to ponder our options, I decided to take the initiative. I had been plotting a way to free Etrin from this creature's grasp for some time now. This was no secret, and though I wasn't yet entirely confident in the ritual I had constructed, I couldn't let this opportunity pass us by. I ran the request by my companions for their approval before presenting it to Etrin himself. We would return to the crystal-filled caves and consider releasing the creature if, and only if, we could attempt my ritual on Etrin, here and now. The creature wanted freedom, and the price for that was Etrin's freedom, or at least our best attempt at it. Though hesitant, Etrin was permitted to agree to our terms, and we immediately set out preparing for the ritual. My mother had taught me the value of my feathers as a component, so the first step was to pluck one from my wing as gingerly as I could. Kemek seemed particularly interested in this, and that made me feel a little bit uneasy. But that, I suppose, is a bridge that we will have to cross later. Next, I pulled a spool of memory thread that we pilfered from the mother of puppets. Tying one end to the feather, I placed the feather against a blank page in my spellbook, tucked the book back in its holster, and spiraled the thread around my crystal-infused arm, wrapping it several times around my hand, the very same hand that I then used to grasp hold of the hag's heartstone that I had recently acquired. These would be the components for the ritual. A ritual that I constructed based off of my knowledge of hag magic. I don't think anyone picked up on that, except perhaps Kemek, though if they did, they chose to stay silent. I played only a single role in this ritual, however, were it not for the cooperation of my companions, utilizing their own knowledge and experience with the weave to act as amplifiers, a sort of magical pylon. The ritual surely would have been a complete disaster. As it was, it was still quite dubious. However, with all of us working together, we somehow managed to pull it off. I pressed the heartstone against Etrin and felt the control, the corruption fade from him and course through the components I had assembled. The process managed to change the heartstone into something we would later learn was called a keystone. And, much to our surprise, As Etrin was restored by the ritual, he was no longer a large dragon standing before us, but rather a man, an elf, and quite an attractive one at that, if I may indulge just a bit. As we all took a moment to recover, we had a chance to speak to Etrin. He told us that he is Etrin Fengalore, High Prince of a place called Kamiraska, that he belongs to a special order from a continent to the south. Within the order, he is a paladin known as a Watcher, whose goal it is to put a stop to any infernal, demonic, or extraplanar evil they encounter. Seems a bit lofty. That is what brought him to Odag, before he stumbled upon the imprisoned creature much like we did. We also learned that he suffers from an infliction known as rune scarring, which occasionally causes spells he's targeted with to inscribe upon his skin, allowing him to utilize them himself. I suspect such a process causes him a great deal of pain and discomfort, though he hasn't admitted to such things. He speaks of this rune scarring as a curse, a negative infliction, and so I'm sure there's a darker side to it that he keeps from us. After resting for a short time, and fearing the consequences should we go back on our word, we turned around and began anew our trek to the Crystal Caverns. The newly freed Etrin decided to accompany us, and I think we were all a little happier for this company. Short on light, we made camp part way into our trek. Decent food and idle conversation filled our evening before we turned in for the night, a night which was, for the most part, uneventful, save for a brief moment where Azure discovered something we identified as a tear of the Snow Mother, a rather useful magical trinket that gives one additional protection from the cold and the ability to inflict some frigid harm upon others. Much like our night, our morning and early afternoon were rather peaceful, and before too long we had arrived at the cavern. It was quite strange. There wasn't the same air of hostility as we made our way through this time, careful not to touch any of the volatile crystals around us, but it was ominous, almost as if the cavern itself had expected our return. It was an easy trek, and it concluded with us all standing before the imprisoned creature, trapped within a massive, glowing crystal. When it spoke, we all heard its voice. The creature told us that it was not of this world, it was a child of the stars. It came to this world because of what it described as an imbalance, that it wished to restore balance, and when it came in contact with the crystals, it became trapped inside of them. When we pressed it on what it meant by imbalance, it insisted that the light in this world had overstepped and become suffocating, that the light would bring doom to Odag within 2 days' time if the creature could not bring some darkness back to the world in order to restore balance. We were all fairly skeptical at this point. We knew very well that the church was treading on dangerous ground as of late, but this didn't feel like a solution. We insisted that we would not free the creature if its goal was to bring darkness, and that it would only be free if it was to leave this world and never come back. A debate ensued between us and the creature. We were firm in our stance, and I believe it sensed that, so it eventually agreed to our terms. It would leave this place and not return. It instructed me to press the newly formed keystone against its crystal prison. Upon doing so, a large, writhing mass of otherworldly tentacles erupted from the crystal, flying around the room before settling down next to me and contorting into a more humanoid silhouette. A red hooded cloak apparating around its body, and a plain white mask now covering its face. All of the crystals around us erupted into dust. I suspect the creature used the power within them to rejuvenate itself somehow. To our dismay, the creature was still insistent on correcting the balance within Odag, and offered to show us, in a final effort to convince us, the destruction that the light intended to bring. Yuriko, Kunkavor, Kemek, and myself agreed to allow this creature to show us these visions. Unbeknownst to us, however, was how it intended on showing us. Small, slick, worm-like appendages sloughed off of the creature from beneath its cloak, crawling their way over to and up us. The last thing each of us felt was the worms wriggling their way into our ears, and a sharp pain within our minds.